Check 1, 2. Let's get this right. There we go. Alrighty. All right. You've tuned in to the A Plus Coaching Corner with yours truly, Carvel Monroe. Here you're going to get VIP coaching that's virtual, interactive, and practical. Listen, I began my life change decades ago, and I'm still pursuing greatness today. I've been involved with mentoring programs since 1999. That's when I won my first award, and I was featured in the Harvard Gazette for volunteering in the Cambridge Public High School. Since then, I've directed multiple mentoring programs on the East Coast. I've owned and operated a decent small business, working with my hands. I have 20 plus years in the marriage game, raising 3 children, and I've supported many others all the way to adulthood. I have taught people facing some tough circumstances, even in the county jail. But today, I am here just for you in the A Plus Coaching Corner. Well, welcome back to the A Plus Coaching Corner. I'm your host, Carvel Monroe. Today, we're doing session number 3, officially session 3, in this 5-part series that I've labeled, the Student Success Coach. Anyhow, so we are on number 3 today. We've been on quite a journey. Obviously, today we are diving into the segment that we call, I didn't make adjustments for a few things, but we'll figure it out, that I call pit stops. So we'll be dealing with pit stops today. We have come quite a ways since day 1, or the first session, where we talked about, we started off with talking about a reflection point, and this is essential. And so for those of you joining in, and you might be wondering, where are we? Where are we going? We got to this point using the foundation question, so to speak, that says, 1 year from today, will you be celebrated, or will you kind of discover that you were basically just tolerated? And I use this introduction just to kind of prime our thinking into the idea of wherever we are, whatever we're doing, we should aim to always be diligent, vigilant, purposeful, intentful, so that we are working day by day, week by week, month by month, to get to a certain level, or to produce a certain output, right? To produce a product, and our work is that product. And so while I am targeting students, just know that we are all learners in some way. We are all students. We are all learners at some capacity, at some stage of the journey. So I think we can all benefit. And so I want to make sure that we can reach students in whichever way we can. And so if you're a parent, if you're an adult, we all have a part to play, right? So we want to make sure we're doing our part. Hopefully that's not in my frame. All right. So with that being said, a year from today, 6 months, pick your timeline. We want to make sure when we have spent time with people in whatever environment that we are not just coasting along. We don't forget about the end goals, so to speak, or some end objectives. And we don't lose sight of that. We're running a race here, and it's more like a marathon. Some of these tasks that we're given is longer than others, right? It takes a longer time. And so I kind of laid a foundation on my class number one or session number one. I talked about how I thought about students who came to me at the end of one year wanting some sort of endorsement from me to say, hey, can you nominate me? Can you recommend me, in other words, for a certain award? And that's perfectly fine, except some students fell asleep, I like to say, along the journey. They forgot that all of their work was not in vain. They forgot that they were working for much more than just a grade, although a grade is probably the main thing. Anyhow, we don't want that to happen to us. So we're talking about pit stops today because it's the next thing in line. So we were saying if we're going to get to be, at the end of a year from now, a month from now, the end of our employment, the end of a project, we want to make sure people kind of are glad that we were there. We want to make sure they were glad that we were on their team, that we worked for them, that we were in their class, whatever the arrangement is. We want to be the kind of person that begins to think about leaving a positive mark no matter where we are. And that only comes about, I believe, by intentionality. So we started off by saying, number one, we need to have a reflection point. Wherever we ended the first time, wherever we ended up on the first project, whatever the end goal status was, and we use that as a way of giving ourselves some feedback, right? We reflect on it. We reflect on our performance, see how well we did. Take our time, look at it ourselves. What did we do good? What did we do? What did we do well? And what needs improvement? Let's put it that way. There's always something that needs improvement. Now, your reflection is not to beat up on yourself and to make you feel like you're inadequate or nothing you do is right. No, we do right things, but there's some things that need improvement. So we reflect on it. And we talked about when we reflect on it, we want to have something as a marker or a memorial. In other words, we think about something and we use that as our motivator. We say, you know what, from this moment on, we recognize this and we're going to make a change. We create a pulpit, in other words, and we begin to speak about the good we're going to do. And we say things like, you know what, next time I'm going to be better. Next year, I'm going to win this award, or I'm going to make it hard for people to overlook me, whatever you want to say, right? And then we went into the second piece of that. The second session, we talked a little bit more about being a professional, right? And we talked about how we can't just rely on our natural ability. There's two things that work. We all have natural ability, natural gifting. And that brings us to a certain place. That takes us to a certain level. But we don't want to just limit or just rely so much on the natural talent that we don't take some intentionality behind it. And so I had an image on the screen of two gears working together. One was a natural ability, and two was that intentionality. And I use analogies or told stories almost like having a coach, right? And a coach might just bring out that extra. That coach is going to make it more intentional. People get a fitness coach or something like that sometimes when they go to the gym, because if they go to the gym on their own, they might just do a certain routine. And if there's not someone who's stretching them beyond their own natural desires or goals, right, what they comfortable fit into, sometimes they don't excel or they don't do their personal best, so to speak. And I shared a story like what I got from my wrestling coach. Sometimes we were rehearsing or practicing and we were doing the calisthenics, the warm-ups, the push-ups and so forth. And they might tell us do 20 push-ups or 30 push-ups. But when you get near to the end of those push-ups and you're counting them out loud and you got two more to do, something like that. And it's like, and in your mind, you're telling yourself, I'm there. And then you got your two more, and then it's one more. And you only got one more left. And then you hear your coach yells out, all right, two more. And you're like, oh my goodness, in your mind. And they'll do that. And then you do those two more. And then you think now you're at, say your goal was 30 and he says two more. Now you're at 32. And then you're like, yes. And there's like one more. Next, 33, one more, until literally you push yourself to exhaustion. And that's just an example of what it takes when you have some intentionality in a sense, and having that external push that which the other gear we talked about, an internal and an external. But we won't rehash too much of that. But I just wanted to bring us back to where we were, where we left off. And when we dealt with being a professional, we talked about showing up, and we talked about showing up. We talked about just having the mindset to work. We talk about producing good work and stuff like that. And I shared some stuff from my community, what people have done, in other words, so they can show up their professional side. So now today we're dealing with pit stops because I ended off by saying you won't always be at your best. I am not always at my best. There are days that you're going to show up and you're not just going to be at your best. And so that's why we said we needed pit stops. And a good example of that, I had to stream and record this session number 2 when some things happened that morning that was not my normal routine that kind of just threw me out of my rhythm. But still, to be a professional, I had to show up and I had to present and I had to produce good work. And it was not necessarily my best work, or I didn't feel the vibe like I was in the zone, which we talked about. But that's a part of being a professional. So there are days that you're going to need some pit stops, which lead us to here. Pit stops basically is, you're not at your best, right? And you're going to need a moment to recover. Or maybe it's going to be a week where you were not at your best, and you're going to need some time to cover. So my motivation for doing this, and I'll put it up on the screen here, but for those you just listening in, my motivation for doing this is we want to be able to break through the bad rap. The bad rap that for parents, for students, for schools, for our society. Sometimes I'm watching a video and it's easy to, as you look up learning in schools nowadays, you're going to find a video of 100 people. I might be exaggerating, but a lot of people, you're going to see a video title that says, "Why I Quit Teaching," right? And it's on social media a lot too. It depends on what I get, the algorithm that you get. You're going to see and hear a lot from teachers and educators who have said, number one, they've quit teaching, and this is why, right? And they'll list the stories. They'll talk about the students. The students can't read. The students, they're not prepared, or the parents, and you can go on. And some people will talk about the government and just society at large. All the things that are being played that's helping to create this. So my motivation, we need to be able to break that bad rap. I don't know about you, but when I was growing up, there was always a negative statistic that I heard growing up. Like growing up in the inner city, as a black male, we would hear things like the high statistic that would say something like something negative would happen to us because we are a black male living in the inner city, right? We'll either be, exed, unalived, we will be on drugs, or we will be in jail, something negative, right? Because the propensity of those things happening in those environments was kind of high, but they were just still statistics. Sometimes, though, I wanted to prove them wrong, and sometimes, I kind of just let it flow. I want you to help break this negative cycle that's going on. I want you to have the mindset that you have what it takes to break this bad rap, right? We all have a little bit of fight, a little clap back in us. We all have a little bit of rebellion. I've been taught, why don't you use it for this? Let's prove people wrong, right? By doing something right. So here's something that's negative and we need to do it. And each person can play a part. We can all break through it and bring something better out of it. So that's the motivation for this. So let's keep walking through now. So here's my prompt, my question that I want to ask. When you're having kind of one of those bad days or a bad moment at the office, at the classroom, right? Which is your typical response? Which is your typical response? I got 5 things on here. Number 1, you don't talk to anyone. Is that you? Number 2, do you put your head down, kind of just, you're having a bad moment or you're not feeling it today, you put your head down, that kind of thing. Number 3, do you mean mug people? Do you give them that mean face, or mean mugging? You just look at people like, you just want to rip them apart, right? Or just give them the stone look. Number 4, do you do little just to get by? You're not feeling it today. You're kind of off your rhythm. You kind of do a little to get by. Or number 5, do you lash out? Lash out, meaning you kind of just snap at whomever, right? So which is your typical response? Now, that's something for you to reflect on. This is probably not the only um, options out here. And perhaps you might say, number one is me and number four is me. Yeah, I've been in any one of these scenarios where, I'm just not feeling it today. I don't want to talk to anybody, right? And I've seen students when they're not feeling it, they want to put their heads down. And we know sometimes the procedure is they don't want those students to put their heads down. If they're not feeling good, send them to the nurse and so on and so forth. But we'll talk about that in a moment, right? And then we keep on going. This one, do you do the mean mug? Do you do the mean mug? I don't know, my software is popping that up, right? Do you do the mean mug, or do you just do little to get by? Do you lash out? So that's something interesting for you to think about. What your response is. All right. So let's go in a little further. Sorry, my screen started populating weird stuff on here, popping up. So your typical response, I was curious to know, right? So when these days that occur when you're just not feeling your best, you're not feeling up to yourself, they can kind of throw us off. So when I talk about being professional, the statement wasn't saying you had to be perfect, right? And this is why we created this third installment to say you're going to need pit stops along the way of your journey. When you're working toward this extensive goal, you're trying to achieve something, you're trying to get somewhere. Along the way, there's going to be enough that frustrates you, right? Annoys you, throw you off, right? And it could be personal things. It could have nothing to do with you. It could just be the care or the concern for someone else, right? It could just be the issues that you're facing in life, because as we've seen, the bad rap also stems from a few things. Some people said it's the parenting. Some people said it's the socioeconomic status. Right? There's a lot of discrepancy or differences in what people have to work with. Right? Some have less than others, and so sometimes all this impacts you chasing your goals. It impacts you learning in the classroom, or it impacts you having to go to work, or whatever it takes, whatever you do in your world. So all of these things work and kind of occur. Life gets in the way, is how I was told. When you get to college, they say that look to your left, look to your right. Somebody's going to drop the class. They're going to drop out. Stuff is going to happen. Why? Because life gets in the way. Life happens to all of us. And you can't always plan for everything. But what we want to do is on those days when we're not feeling at our best, when we're not performing at the level we need to perform, we want to make sure we don't just throw it all away, so to speak. Because I think it's in those moments where students get derailed, right? They get derailed. I talked about this emotional capacity the last time, and it's perfectly understandable. As humans, we're going to feel those times, but we need to be able to spot when we are low, right? And we need to be able to have a remedy in place. So let's talk about a little bit about pit stops, right? And I like to use analogies and stories so that at least when you leave, you can remember. Now you must be familiar with racing car games, the NASCAR events, or the F1, Formula One. They all have these high-powered vehicles that's just zooming around the clock, around the track at incredible speeds. But those vehicles can only sustain those speeds and those turns and all of that for a period of time. They're going to need to pull aside and have this little pit stop if they're going to succeed, right? There's just no way they're going to keep running around the track, running around the track. So they need these moments where they have these pit stops where they could pull over and handle their business. And I want to talk about two things, kind of just to categorize real quickly about a pit stop. And number one, I want to talk about the mechanics of a pit stop. Look like I'm gonna be mashing these words today. And I want to point out that there's a skill service when they get pulled over, right? There's a skill service that gets when you get pulled over that you receive. They do things like they do tire changes. They will swap out the old tires and put on some new tires. So like I'm saying, these cars are traveling so hard, so fast around this track. They are rubbing the treading off those tires. They're getting worn down, worn out, and it's almost impossible for them to finish that race successfully without pulling over and taking care of those needs. And you and me And other people we know, we go out every day, routinely, let's just say, and we are doing a lot. We are moving fast. We are managing a lot of load. And all of that speed and load creates a lot of friction that literally wears out our tires, so to speak. Not the tires on our vehicles, but our tires like that we ride on every day that keeps us going, right? And it's more of a mental or a psychological thing, but it wears us down. And you must realize you need time to pull aside off the road, off the journey, so that you can get serviced, right? So you can get service. And that's an ideal, right? And there's things that happen. Some people might say, well, we kind of naturally get these things, right? You get a vacation, you get a holiday built in, a break, a spring break, a winter break. And you might think that is my pit stop, right? But not necessarily true, right? Not necessarily true. Those things can happen without you getting serviced. Let's use this for an example. Let's use this. I was going to talk about this later, but I go with the flow sometimes. So let's use this for example. I'm going to put this little, you see this little car I have up here, just a little visual, right? So let's use this as an example. If I drive my car, let's just say wherever, back and forth somewhere, I go to the store or I go to work every day, zoom, 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 zoom. When I get out, when I get home and I pull over my car and I park my car, is my vehicle being serviced? And the answer is no. It's just pulled over. The engine might cool down because I shut it off, but what have I done to it? I didn't check the tires. I didn't check the air pressure. Did I check the fluids? Did I put gas in it? See, those are all things that literally, if I'm not doing those things, then I'm not really servicing my vehicle. And that's the idea we need to realize. Like, because we naturally get a break, we get a holiday here, we get a vacation there. It's not really being serviced if all we do is just pull away. To stop activity doesn't mean that we're getting service. Let me say it one more time. If just because you stop doing something for a moment, and we can't always equate that to be service, like you're getting service. No, you are, it might be a break. It might relax you because you're not on the go. You're not working in that moment, so to speak, right? So it might be a break, but you're not necessarily doing anything to check up on your progress, check up on your engine, right? Although you might get a break, you might get a relief. So we want to be intentional in having these pit stops, and we're going to build into that even a little bit more next week on a different uh, part of this session. So we're saying we don't just want to take time, take a break, right, and call it service. So we're seeing again the mechanics of the pit stop. We're talking about the tire being changed. We talk about the fuel. They're adding fuel so that they can continue the journey, or perhaps so they can finish the race for sure and hopefully win the prize, right? So there is a lot that needs to take place when you take your pit stop. You need to want to make sure you can set time aside where you can get some things changed out. It could be some stinking thinking, as they say, some negative thinking. You might need to work on those, right? And be very intentional, right? So when we're talking about just because you stop the activity doesn't really fix it. If, for example, I am addicted or I have a strong desire for video games and playing video games, just because I am not able to play it for a moment in time, that doesn't really solve my problem. So I might need to be intentional and have someone that I can talk to, and talk to them about it. I might need to journal, be more intent. It says, and write my thoughts down. And so, you know what? I really want to break away from this. And that helps you to work through it, right? Because so they have this idea that they use in education, right? And a lot of educators and throw this word around. They talk about metacognition, right? Metacognition is the process of thinking about thinking, that kind of a thing, right? Where you kind of you're examining, so to speak, or you're paying attention to the way you think about certain things. Now, all that is good. So we need to borrow from that and bring that into this area when I'm talking about your pit stop. When you make those stops, you might want to take time to process and think about, gee, what happened this week? Why was I so triggered yesterday? Why was I so weak? Why was I so short and I was, just snapping at people? Or, look at those things and then maybe think about what you can do, right? I didn't prepare, but I have some things that I try to share with students on how to work through that. Maybe I didn't prepare to share it today all I could, but I like to give you the visual. I'm not going to go digging for it, but I'll share that, just some steps to walk through some things. All right, so we talk about this side of the pit stop where it's the mechanics of it, but I also want you to realize the nature of it. Right, I'm gonna say it like that: the nature of it, the nature of the pit stops. Okay, they're strategic, they're timed, they're planned, and this is no particular order. Actually, I could have re reorganize them, but just keep these three things in mind. So we talk about the mechanic of pit stops, just the idea of stopping and getting things exchanged, getting things checked on. They might do some minor repairs, real quickly. But the nature of them too, they're strategic, they're timed, and they're planned. I'll say strategic, for example. Let's talk with that one. The reason why I say they're strategic is people don't really want to stop. When you're doing something good, you don't want to stop, right? When you are winning, when you have a good position, when you have good momentum going for you, all those things, right? When those things are happening, you might not want to stop, right? I get it, right? You don't want to give up ground because sometimes if you pull over in a pit stop, and if you ever watch a race, it might look like, man, you just lost that position. If you pull over, you're going to lose the position you had on the track, right, so to speak. So keep that in mind. Sometimes for you to make a pit stop, it might look like you are losing. For you to pull away from the hustle and the bustle, it might look like everybody else is having the fun, so to speak, right? Everybody else is belonging, they're in, and whatever, it's all happening for them because that's what our mind tells us. For me to stop, for me to pull aside, for me to take a moment to check up on me and work on me, I might feel like I'm losing ground. I might feel like other people are advancing and I'm getting left behind. So pit stops, the nature of them, they're very strategic, right? Some people might wait in the real thing, in a go-kart race, in a NASCAR race, right? In a F1 Formula One race, I should say. They might wait to make a pit stop, say maybe when there's a safety flag out and everybody needs to clear the track or whatever it is. They might do it then because nothing is happening. People are reduced to a certain speed or whatever, and so there's no real loss. So some people can hold off for a safety flag. That could be strategic. Some people will do maybe the pit stop sooner, knowing that it's going to give them an added advantage. It's going to enhance their performance later. So hopefully you're following what I'm saying. It's a strategic reason for taking a pit stop. And my point is, you don't want to just keep going, and never take one, because you're going to find yourself running on E, so to speak, or running on some worn tires, and you're not going to be at your optimal performance, right? You're going to be, what you're actually producing will not be at your best. And so we need to be able to spot that. And in this generation, in this day and age, when we have so much that we like to do, right? Social media, we can spend, right, quite a bit of time on there, playing our games on our computer and our mobile devices. That can take a lot of our time, right? Hanging out with our friends, chit-chatting, whatever it is, that can use a lot of our time. So, and all those aren't necessarily renewing us and reviving us. But in the same ways, learning, school after school, day after day, subject after subject, tests, assessments, projects, that too. So we need time to pull away. And somebody might need to hear that and be able to think that's a part of our strategy. To pull away doesn't mean that you're going to get left out, right? You need to be able to pull away, not necessarily want to be at every event, not at every social activity. You don't need to be on the loop on every gossip conversation, because those are some of the things that is hindering you and will hinder others from reaching those goals, right? So hopefully I've kind of talked about that good enough where you understand it's not just pulling away from the learning stuff, right? Those little breaks, but it's also pulling away from those things that we enjoy, we like a lot, right? Like our social media, like our games, right? Like our peer groups, the friends, the company that we keep, the conversations that we get into, that we spend so much on. Oftentimes, I can see the impact. I see students sometimes, all the while, they're doing the shadow boxing, slap boxing. Everybody wants to square up. It's like it permeates our minds so much. And I get it because the communities that we live in, we kind of breathe that, right? It's kind of like capping on one another. But sometimes we need to pause and pull ourselves even out of those and tell a friend maybe, well, I'm not coming today. Or, drop out of a chat. I'm not responding to the chat today. Those things will tie us up and literally wear us down. So even those activities we need to be able to pull out from. So we talk a little bit about the mechanics of the pit stop. Now I said the nature of a pit stop, right? Um, and I just said a little bit to make sure we're intentional about what we do when we perform those stops. So I kind of crunch a couple of things together right there. All right. So let's move in a little bit to say this is essential because life gets in the way. We get beat on, right? We get worn down by the process. And that's a reality. I want to share a quote with you from Frederick Douglas. This is an important quote. There's a newer version, but I rather his. His is the original version. And it says, "It is easier to build strong children than to repair broken men. It is easier to build strong children than to repair broken men." So, this essentially, I like this quote in this saying because it talks about this early prevention, so to speak. It talks about prevention, in other words, right? So it's easier now when you're younger to get these concepts. It's easier now to tell students these things because it'll help them be a stronger individual. And I don't know how, and I had wrote these questions down wherever my notes were. How are you going to be a strong person if you're one dimensional? How are you going to be strong if all you think about is just the immediate? If you remember in my previous session when I talked about having a long-term view, right? Because that hinders people sometimes from being a professional. They have the idea. We talk about some of the misconceptions they had sometimes about learning. And they'll say things like, well, I don't need this, or I don't need this. This is not what I want to do. I want to, you know, do XYZ. I want to be a musician. I want to be a rapper. I want to be a baller, right? And so sometimes they use these um, that kind of thinking not to go all out on what they have in front of them now. And so that's kind of a one-dimensional view. So I'm saying, how are you going to be strong if you're one-dimensional? If all your focus on was just one thing, if all your focus is on is just academic, and you're not thinking about the other part of you, the emotional part of you, or the socio-emotional part of you that needs it. If you're not thinking about, gee, I'm weary, I'm breaking down, then you won't be. If you're not thinking about the spiritual side of you, so you'll show up every day then, and you'll be just pouring out doing stuff, and it'll feel random. It'll feel meaningless. It'll feel as if, why am I doing this? And especially if you think that you are not a good student, right? Or you're not a good worker, or you just don't get this, then you're going to lose momentum, right? So this is what I'm saying. And oftentimes I will tell people you are more than just a grade, right? And so you want to have that mindset too, that don't be so one dimensional. Yes, the goal is for you to get a good grade, but students that were looking to be nominated, so to speak, they weren't just being nominated because they were A students. No, there's other awards for that, right? So back to my point. So what we're talking about, we want to make sure you're celebrated. Some of the students that I celebrate the most are not necessarily the students who are the smartest or who get the best grades. But I like a student who shows up and they're doing their work. They're putting in the effort, which is what we talk about. They're asking the questions, and on one side, they're doing that. And then on the other side, they are not the problems. They're not the ones who are, making the disruption for others. And so that is important. So this is why we're saying we want to make sure you recognize it's not just how well you do academically, but what about your conduct? Can you excel there too? That is what we want to celebrate. Wow, I love having this person in my classroom because they work and they have such a good demeanor and attitude. They come ready and they are encouraging others, or they're trying themselves to make it work. So that is an important. It is easier to build strong children. So we want to build you up strong when you're young, but not just children. I want you to break this down for a moment and see children as being early and men as being late, right? If you see what I'm saying. The quote says it's easier to build strong children than to repair broken men. That's the quote. So if we're talking about everybody's learning, I don't want you to time out because you say, well, I'm not a children, or I'm not a child, or I don't have children. Well, think about it this way. It's easier to build strong early, or make it strong early, than to repair it later on, right? It is just easier. So hopefully you get that concept, and I want you to think about that. So we're talking about prevention in this piece, and really tie that into the pit stops, because the pit stops is a prevention. You're pulling over, you're changing out tires before they get worn down and have a tire blowout, right? You're adding fuel or making other little minor repairs, right? So you don't run on E, or something that was tiny doesn't, further expand, break, and creates an issue. So you can see from this particular piece what I'm saying. Hopefully that makes sense. Now let's just kind of close it out. And today I'm not going to talk about all that you do in a pit stop, right? But the idea is what I want to get to you. So let's talk about this. So again, this talks about prevention, because things will happen to you as you're pursuing your goal. Some days I feel weary. Some days I feel tired. Some days something happens and I have to bounce back from it. And like I said, when I did the stream on professionalism, I had encountered some changes to my normal routine that I just wasn't in the zone as well, but still had to try to regroup and make it happen. But when the stream was over, guess what I did? I reflected on it, because I was like, why am I feeling this way? And that's what I'm saying, being more intentional, even in that area, right? And I want you to reflect on things like that, and then you can do the work. All right, so here's the last piece that I want to talk about. I pulled these out for a reason. Let me take this down for a reason. Take this down for a minute. Not so fast. I had these little signs that I would use in my classroom. And this is when I was trying to get students more involved, engaged, and use this as a visual cue as well. So I knew when they understood something, they'll raise this one up, or the group would say, I got it. Or this one up when it's, all right, slow it down a little bit. You're kind of moving too fast. So I don't really got it. And so I only brought this up here to talk about a signal, right? Sometimes it's good to have a signal, right? And that you can use to communicate how are you feeling. And this would be the approach, where I'm not talking about exactly about all that you're going to do in your pit stop today. I mentioned a few things, but I want to talk about this. It's a good way to communicate to those in front of you, on your job, in your classroom, though, when you're not feeling it. When for some reason you're just not at your best, it'd be a good time. So in some classrooms, it depends on what classroom students have their hand signals when they want to use the bathroom. They'll do this, I think, the ASL sign for bathroom, to let people know, hey, I got to use the bathroom. So if the teacher's presenting or whatever, they don't have to, can I use the bathroom? They just throw the signal up and wave it back and forth. Some students use the fingers, where it's like one or two, whatever, to say, I got to use the bathroom. Depends on the classroom. So they have these signals to communicate. I think as a part of you on your level is to create a signal, or establish a signal in your classroom. So if you're a teacher, you'd probably create one. If you're a student, obviously if the teacher can do it, it'd be great. But depending on what age you're at. If you're a student, it'd be great for you to talk with your teachers maybe earlier on in the school year, at the very beginning, something like that, to say, hey, you know, if I, here's a signal that I'm going to use when I'm not feeling it. Now, it got to be an appropriate signal, right? Or it could just be at the beginning of that class. It could be as simple as, okay, it's the beginning of the class. You come and let that teacher know, hey, today I might not be at my professional best, right? And then you communicate that where it's expected, right? Now, you're not going to do that every day where you say, hey, I'm not at my best, not at my best. It's just a waste of time. No. Once in a while, like I said, one of my streams, I just wasn't there on that day. Too much was going on for me, and I didn't get a time to kind of meditate and visualize and work through my pieces. So it'd be good to establish that, communicate early, they would say, and often, right, in the business world. So you want to communicate early. You want to be able to say whether at the beginning of the class, this is one of those days where you're just not feeling it, right? Or you're on your job, you're not feeling it. You got an assignment, you're in a work group, whatever it might be. Communicate it early just to say, you know what, guys, I'm a little bit today. Now, people say when they're sick, they'll say when they're not feeling well, but they don't tend to say when they're triggered by something else. They just show their emotions. They come in angry, frustrated. They start mouthing off, clapping back, just because they don't know how to regulate that particular component of what they're feeling. So you want to establish that. So, back to what we're saying is in the metaverse, when we're talking about pit stops, they have a lot of signage that they use, right? So where the person comes over and pulls over, where the person stops their vehicle, but they also use this, what they call a lollipop, right? It's 3 different versions, but it looks like a lollipop, as you can see. And they use this, they use this just to communicate. That's what it looks like when it's laying down, the one on the bottom, so that the driver knows, okay, keep them brakes on right now because we are servicing the vehicle. And they'll hold it out in front of the vehicle. You probably know this. And if not, you can look up some of those racing so you can see what that looks like. So what we're talking about is just having a way to communicate those bad days to whomever is in the room, whoever you're working with, whoever might be leading or facilitating, right? So that you don't always have to, it's like you have another way of communicating now. You don't always have to lash out if that's you. You don't always, those questions I ask in the beginning. What's your typical response? You don't have to mean mug people. Now, you're not going to walk around with a sign probably to everybody. You're not going to be able to get everybody, but it's a good way to be able to communicate at least to core people at each room, what's going on, so that they know, hey, this is one of those moments where I'm just not at my best, right? And I'm here and I want to be here maybe, but I'm just not at my best today, right? So be nice for you to create a way to communicate that. And if you are the adult, then you find a way to communicate that. Now, there's nothing wrong with other approaches, but we're going to set that up. So like I said, you can either create a hand gesture that you guys create, maybe as a teacher, you can set one up. Maybe if you're the student, you can just communicate that early when that's happening. Or if you want to try to establish one with your teacher, right? Be proactive. And that might trigger something, because sometimes teachers like to incorporate the student's view, right, and get students on board and create one of these democratic where we all come up with a rule. Maybe that would be one of those things you say, how about a signal for those days where we're just not on point? And again, I know people might want to abuse it, but it's not for abuse. It's just to say, hey, this might be a day where I'm not feeling my best. All right. So I've talked about that, and I kind of wanted to leave it right there and not go into too much and overwhelm, so that when we come back on the next stream, God willing, if everything flows as well, we're going to talk a little bit more between this and the last one we do, maybe on some particulars. But I talk about a few things here that I mentioned, that just to be intentional. Sometimes it's to review the issue, review why you are feeling the way you're feeling. If you can remember from the very first episode we did, the very first one, and I talked a little bit about the Pope, the reflective work, I think. Let me see if it's here. I talked about, I don't want to bring up the old slides, but we talked about reflecting, right? It's important for you to look back and see, not moving on too quickly. That's my thought. We talk about not trying to move on too quickly. Let that thing cut you. Remember, if you can remember me talking about some of that, like when you went through a hardship or a hard place, that kind of a thing. Don't be in a quick, don't be in a, don't be so quick just to want to move on from it. Well, it's the same thing. Is this slide I'm talking about? Um, to be. Let it cut you, let it crush you. And I said, or aid, let it soak in. Think back on it and don't be in such a rush to want to move on. Don't be in such a rush to want to move on. Just so when you have a bad day, when you're not feeling it, think back and ask yourself, why am I feeling what I'm feeling? Why am I feeling this way, right? And that might help you. All right. So that kind of covers that piece. And our third element, we've covered it all in a nutshell. So quickly, just to kind of go back, we talked about the review before we go, I should say. So we talked a little bit about what we're trying to do is we need to break this bad rap that is out there in education, in learning, right? But also too, you can transfer this to other places, circles that you roll in. We have to. We got to be able to break this because it's not going to get better if everybody just pointing the finger. And I want students and learners to do their part in breaking this bad rap. And that means you got to tighten up on areas that you need to tighten up on. It's just that simple, right? There's help for you, but you got to be able to tighten up on it the best you can, right? And part of it is to add to what we've built so far. We're saying, hey, you need to create these pit stops in your life or in your routine that you literally pull aside and get service done, right? You change out. You recognize that, man, I'm tired from this raid. I'm feeling worn out. Like I'm starting to slip, right? I ain't got no traction left. I've been just doing the same thing for a while. My environment is kind of um, is very persuasive. That's what happens, right? So all that thing can just run us down and wear us down after a while. And so we want to be refilled, right? We want to be recharged, and we need to be very intent on that. And so when we were talking about the nature of it, I talked about the strategic part, but I didn't talk so much about the timed. Time meaning these pit stops, these you're not taking a pit stop every day, a whole semester, a whole quarter, right? Whatever, right? It can't be every day and it can't be for a long time. NASCAR, these guys pull over, pit stops, they got these, 8-second change my tire, boop, 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 back on the road, that kind of a thing, right? Or they got a short stop where they just come in and they do a lot of things in a short period of time. I won't play the video because sometimes I try not to mess around with any copyright material too much. But you get my idea. So these pit stops should be timed. So we talked about it strategic already, where we're saying timed. It's just a moment where you need to get in there. Boom. It could be a moment at home where you just sit down and you take a few minutes out of your day, your evening, your afternoon. It could be the night before. Like I shared last week, how somebody from their community, they kind of make their to-do list for the next day. Well, in the same way, you can take a moment to kind of wipe your feet from the day's event. Wipe your feet, not physically, but in a way of, let me clear my mind. This happened today. And it's just a moment. So this is what I mean. It's got to be intentional, right? It's part of this intentional piece so that we can get through it. It's timed. And then I didn't really talk much about it being planned because I chased something else. But let me wrap it up by talking about being planned. We talk about, so it's planned. So you're going in, there's stuff you got to do, right? We know, like we mentioned, you're changing tires, you're adding fuel, right? So you want to plan what you do in that activity. Some people do some more structural, formal things, go to the park, whatever, go sit outside, nature, whatever your thing is, community. So it needs to be planned though. So it's working for you, right? That talks about the nature of it. I wanted to deal with those pit stop you take. And then when we get into this, the next session, we'll talk more. When we talk about power banks, we'll include people and we'll talk a little bit more about people that can help you in that pit stop, right? That'll be in the next session. So you can see each session kind of builds on the previous one. And so you'll come away with this feeling rich right? And enriched so that you can literally know you have the tools and the mindset to be able to walk through and get this goal for the next season in your life. You are not without understanding, you're not without knowledge, you're not without practical advice, right? So those pit stops, we're going to make them strategic, we're going to make them timed. There'll be a time to it, and we'll definitely have planned. It won't just be a, I'm just going to get out of here just to get out of here. I'm going to, that's not really planned. You haven't really done the work. It has to be. So you go through the cycle and you flush some things out that need to be flushed. You change some things out that need to be changed so that you can jump right back in the race on the next day or the next week or whatever it is and keep it going, right? Instead of just waiting for the break, the holiday, right? If you want to be resilient, and that's another buzzword that we pushed a lot, to be resilient, you have to be these things as well: strategic, planned, and have it timed, right? It's almost like the SMART goal thing, but we won't get into that today. All right, I think I covered a lot of ground. That's all I made time to do today so that I don't get too carried away and give out too much information. All right, so I'm wrapping up right here. I want to thank you all for sitting in on this session. Keep in mind that this is just how I present and do a little bit of rough work. I have that I'm putting together the actual digital download, which you'll be able to get, or if you know someone, maybe you know some students that you want to help them this year, I'm piecing that together, which has a lot more to it than what you see here today, right? And that's going to be really good for you if you work with students, or you are a student yourself, you know somebody, your family member, someone. So I'll be working on that, and I'll have that linked up for you. As I've said before, that'll go to a link to the website, coachingcorner.com, where you'll get that. It's not there now, but we're working on it. If you're looking at this and the time has passed, we've done all 5 sessions, then it will be there. And that is going to be where it goes into further detail with more activities, almost like a workbook, and you'll be able to literally work through the year. And it might be a great resource that you can use during the course of the year, right? During the course of the year, as a reminder, as like a little thing just to get you through and make sure you're on track. That's what we're going to make it. All right. I do want to thank you for coming out, and I'm wrapping it up right here. Until the next time, we'll be back with session 4. That right now it's called Power Banks. Power Banks. And we'll get more into that then. Well, I don't know what else you're doing. We are done here. Time for you to get out of here. Go do something. Later.